We are live. Thank you. Thank you so much. I am joined tonight. My name is Julie Oliver, by the way. I am joined tonight by two incredibly thoughtful, progressive, leaders in the agricultural space. We are joined tonight by former Agricultural Commissioner of Texas, Jim Hightower. Welcome, and Iowa congressional candidate for the 4th, J.D. Scholten. And I would love to just share a little bit about both of y'all with the people who are viewing. I'm sure Commissioner Hightower needs no introduction here in Texas. He is a national radio commentator, a writer, a public speaker, New York Times bestselling author, and Commissioner Hightower spent 4 decades battling the powers that be on behalf of the powers that ought to be. And I will say you have the best one-liners and the best quips. And I get to work frequently with Clayton Tucker, who's running here for state Senate. Yes. And at every event I use, he quotes Commissioner Hightower. But it is an incredible honor to be here with you today. JD, you ran in 2018. We were running in different states, but have very similar districts, except you don't have Austin up there in Iowa. I'd say that's the only part that's missing. But you came so close to beating Steve King. And there aren't very many, I don't think there's anything nice I can say about Steve King. So my mom said, if you can't say anything nice, just don't say anything at all. You came within 3 percentage points of beating Steve King, and you came back. I'm so grateful that you did. You came back to finish the job, and you will finish the job in November of this year. And Iowa will have some representation that is progressive, but also somebody who cares and knows so much about this area. And I just want to share a little bit like what we're going to talk about, because I did not know until I ran. And I will say I am a city mouse. I grew up in South Oak Cliff in Dallas, moved to a little tiny town called Ovilla, but we did not raise any animals other than a few dogs who we never got fixed. But I never knew how much agriculture permeates almost every area of our life, whether we know it or not. It's our economy, worker safety, immigration, food supply, the environment, the climate, trade. And so I kind of wanted to affectionately call tonight everything you wanted to know about agriculture, but were afraid to ask or maybe didn't know. So I'd like to turn it over to you, Commissioner Hightower, and share a few opening remarks.
Well, this is, thank you, Julie. You're doing a terrific job there. And you're exactly right about the rural communities are such a heartbeat of our state and of Iowa. I've spent a good bit of time in Iowa, much to the amazement of the people there. Here came this Texan wandering in there. I was back there with the farm crisis in the 1970s and 80s. And actually I learned the core of the problem when an Iowa farmer asked me, he said, do you know the difference between a pigeon and a farmer? And I said, well, no, I guess I don't. And he said, a pigeon can still make a deposit on a John Deere. and that was the problem back then. And that is the problem today. We have an agricultural economy that favors the middleman. The squeeze, basically, of the financiers on one side, and the suppliers, the seed monopolies, and et cetera, and then the buyers of the commodities that can squeeze the farmer both ways. And that is happening again today, just as it did in the Depression in the 1920s and 30s. The farm depression led the Great Depression. And then the Depression as well in the 1970s and 80s. And now here we are again with that fight. So I headed a group back in the, I was in Washington, D.C. For a while. I graduated from college here in Texas and went off to D.C. for a while. I wanted to meet some other sorts of people. And I had got involved in the public interest movement, Ralph Nader and people like that. And we were doing agriculture. We were talking about agribusiness giants. And I had my friends back then who were more involved in urban type of politics say, well, what are you doing with farm? I mean, what is that about? And I said, it's not about farm, it's about power. Who has power? if you cannot control your own dinner, then you have no power. And that is the battle that we're in. And that's the importance of this issue. And this issue has to be driven by people who can articulate it, can go to the people in a language that those folks understand. And that is Julie Oliver, and that is J.D. Scholten. And that's why I'm here tonight, is to back two people who are out there fighting on the front lines. For all of us, as Julie indicated, it's not just about the farmers themselves. It's about rural folks. It's about teachers. It's about a community, which is the core of it right there, the community, and about food, whether or not we're going to have real food or we're going to have corporate plastic food. So that's why I'm here tonight, and pleased to be with all of you.
Thank you. JD, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I got really, well, I'll bring it back to how I got involved originally. And I was living a very comfortable life until 2016 happened, the election. And I think it affected a lot of people a lot of different ways. And for me, I wanted to get more active, but I didn't know what that meant. And ultimately that Thanksgiving, I went to visit my grandma, who's my inspiration in my life. She was lived on the farm most of her life and was an elementary school teacher. And she told me the last thing she said before I had to leave, she said, JD, you need to take care of the farm. And she ended up passing away. And when I decided to move back home, and I'm in my childhood home that I ended up getting from my parents, I started looking into things. I started looking to see what the farm economy was and the rural economy. And I remember when we launched this campaign in 2018 or 2017, and I went to all 39 counties in my personal car, stopping on Main Street and seeing these towns that have seen better days. And I mean, what we see, I mean, we're the second most agriculture producing district in America, the 4th district is. And it ultimately goes, if a farmer doesn't have money to go into town to pay the bills, then the town suffers. Then it just adds on and adds on. And we did a tour this cycle in the fall and a little bit before the shutdown, called the Don't Forget About Us tour, where we went into towns of under 1,000 people. And as much as we all like politics and talk about big, huge change and things that would change, we realize most of these towns are fighting to keep their local grocery store alive. And that's the reality of this. And a lot of it comes from these monopolies, these agriculture monopolies are sucking the wealth out of rural America. And in order to revitalize a lot of rural America, we need to have the same battle that we had 100 years ago. And we can get into this a lot more in a little bit, but that's kind of where I'm coming from and a lot of these things. And we brought this message to all 39 counties. We continue to show up, and it's one of those things where it's not about one TV ad. It's about going there and engaging with folks and getting folks who haven't voted for a Democrat ever, or maybe it's turning a lot of eyes and ears to understanding, you know what, we are in this together. And one of the things that I'm most proud of last cycle is not only did we move the needle 24 points, which is third most in the nation, we got 25,000 more votes than there are even Democrats in a district, in this district. And that was in a midterm, which tends to be a little bit more conservative here in Iowa. So we're excited with where we're at right now. And just, this is an honor to be here today with both of you.
Well, thank you. I do want to, let's talk history, because when we're talking about the economies of these smaller towns, you can see that the economies once centered around agriculture, farming and ranching, right? And y'all have both alluded to that big agribusinesses have come in and squeezed farmers and ranchers and people who have had these operations in their families for generations. And when those economies, when those local economies get squeezed, we see the ramifications in healthcare. I mean, a hospital system can't be sustained. Clinics, they have a hard time attracting doctors. You have a hard time attracting nurses. Schools sometimes shut down. And the next generation ups and leaves the town. So let's talk about the history. And Commissioner Hightower, I know you know the history of this. How did we get here to where we are today? And give us as much information as you want, because I don't think that most of us pay attention to how much this really actually impacts our lives.
Well, the central issue in American politics from the very start, the founding, has been this: too few people control too much of the money and power, and they use that control to get more for themselves at our expense. That's happening in spades right now in Washington, D.C., in Austin, in Des Moines. The powers that be are running roughshod over the powers that ought to be, the workaday people, the common folks that make up the heart of America and the strength of America. And so we've got to get back to that kind of politics that you two are doing, not taking the big money. In fact, rejecting, both of you have rejected big PAC money, political action committee, corporate donors, and et cetera. You can't win political fights in any capital, state or national, on the inside, because money controls that. You win it from the outside by bringing regular folks who are not really ideological for the most part. My old daddy, you got to be aware of Texans telling daddy stories, but I had a pretty good one. And he didn't even know he had a political philosophy. But he did, and he expressed it to me time and again in these terms. He said, Jim, everybody does better when everybody does better. And that's what's missing in our society today. The powers that be, Wall Street, Washington, have decided that the special few can enhance their fortunes at the expense of the rest of us, at the expense of everybody. And that is destroying the American ideal of economic fairness, social justice, equal opportunity for all people. That's what Democrats have historically been about. That is what I believe Americans are about, whatever political title you use. The true political spectrum in America is not right to left. That's theory. That divides people. Rather, the true political spectrum is top to bottom. That's where you live. That's your zip code. You know whether you're on the top or you're on the bottom. And the vast majority of people are on the bottom. And that is the reason that your candidacies mean so much to America. 2 congressional districts linked by I-35, running right from Austin through Des Moines on up to Storm Lake and right into Minnesota. That highway there links these 2 districts together. We are together as a people, and we've got to reject these ideological schemes and scams that the powers that be are using to divide us and to enhance their own power.
Agreed. And I will say, I know that highway really well, not only because I've driven it a lot just over the last 3 years, but JD, you may not know this. My family, my mom and my dad actually moved to Texas from Minnesota. Oh. And so we got to take 2 vacations a year. In the summertime, we got to go to Minnesota. And in the wintertime, we got to go to Minnesota. And so we always drove. There were not enough money for airline tickets in our family. So we drove that highway, and we would drive from Dallas to Des Moines. My dad would always make us, we got to make good time. And we'd always have to stop in Des Moines, and then we'd pick up the next morning and head on to Minneapolis. But
So about 10 miles before you hit the Minnesota border, coming from Des Moines on the west-hand side, that's our family farm.
Oh.
So,
wow.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Driven by it.
I just want to say about JD. JD was a baseball player, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
that's
He was a baseball player. You know?
Yep. I played against UT. We took 2 or 3 when they were, I think, number 1 at the time, but then they ended up winning the College World Series, and they beat us in the Big 12 championship. I'll say that. But then I played independent ball, and I played down in Fort Worth against Fort Worth, and those were 3 of the hottest days. I think they were like 114, 112. And maybe 112 again, but just a dry heat. But it was a little different.
I didn't make college ball, but you are talking to the starting second baseman of the Denison High School Yellow Jackets.
All right, I like it. I like it.
I haven't heard of Denison in years either. My dad. So I totally digress. My dad worked in pawn shops when I was growing up, so he never found a bargain that he did not like. And we would go all over. I was just telling somebody earlier, I was like, I used to go to Burleson because my dad would drive us there for estate sales and garage sales. And so we'd go to Denison a few times for some, well, those might have been garage sales, but there may have been car shows up there as well. I can't remember, but yeah. He loves car shows and garage sales and estate sales. And so
country life.
JD, I do want to talk to you a bit because you really bring a perspective that I think not only has appealed, like you said, appealed to voters in your district across political spectrum. But one of the things that I think is really important that is not getting, I think, addressed enough by current leaders is the lack of antitrust enforcement in this particular industry. Do you want to speak to that a little?
Yeah, and so I think to get a little bit of that, give a brief history on it. So, I mean, going way back to even the Boston Tea Party, it was a rejection against the monopoly of the East India Trading Company. And when we created this country, in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, there were a lot of anti-monopoly themes in it. And in fact, Thomas Jefferson wanted in the Bill of Rights, in the First Amendment, in the First Amendment, he wanted to have, along with freedom of religion and freedom of speech and all this stuff, he wanted freedom from monopolies. And so we had, like I mentioned before, we had this battle 100 years ago. So in 1920, the big five packers controlled 45% of the market share, and they manipulated the prices on cattle. They met every Tuesday at 2 p.m. in Chicago and manipulated the prices. And so they ended up breaking up the big five. And as a year later, actually where my grandma taught fifth grade education forever is Northwood, Iowa. And the representative from Northwood, Iowa in 1921 was the sponsor of the Packers and Stockyards Act. And so for decades, things were kept for decently kept, the market share was balanced. And so when I was born in 1980, the top four had about 35% of the market share. Well, today in cattle, the top four controls over 85%. And what we see, especially in this pandemic, is how vulnerable our food system is. And so this is something that I think we can build a coalition of consumers, the workers, and the farmers. And for a long time, the powers that be would love to put farmers against the workers. For a lot of time, there's always that beef, to use I guess a bad pun. But I feel right now there's this huge potential to talk about it, because for years and years and years they say, oh, we're fine. This is meant for cheap food. But what you realize is it goes to corporate profits. It doesn't go to the consumer. And the consumer's paying as the most they ever have for beef right now. And the farmers and the ranchers are not seeing that. And so there are a push for, especially there's a lot of politicians who are pushing for investigations, but you know that they're doing that because they just want to act like they're doing something. It's not getting anything done. What we really need to do is enforce our antitrust laws and really decentralize our food industry. And one of the stats that I love to use that's outside of a lot of traditional farming, apple juice. 60% of the apple juice consumed in America is made in China. And just think of, I mean, the 4th District isn't really known for apples, but there's plenty of orchards around here. And we got to understand that most of agriculture is driven by policy, and the market goes towards kind of the policy. And so this is, to me, if we create the policy for it, the markets go towards it. And so this is something that I absolutely believe is doable and changeable.
I agree. Go ahead, Commissioner Hightower. Sorry.
This is the core issue of corporate power, the middle structure squeezing consumers and farmers alike. I've got a newsletter that I do monthly called the Hightower Lowdown, and we did a piece just a few months ago about agricultural monopolies taking place. You go down and you buy a bucket of chicken, a big bucket of chicken at KFC or wherever. It's going to cost you about $29. The corporate controller of contractor of the farmers who produce those chickens gets $5 out of that. The middleman gets $23.41 out of that. The farmer who raises the chickens gets 58 cents out of a $29 bucket of chicken. That's what we're dealing with. And that monopoly power, and as JD is indicating there, this has been against the law for a century. The Packard and Stockyard Act, and let's be honest, Democratic administrations as well as Republicans have refused to enforce the Packard and Stockyard Act. And now we're seeing the price of that with this COVID-19 crisis exploding in the meatpacking factories in Iowa, in Colorado, in Texas, all across the South, all across the country, really. And we have good local farmers and ranchers who produce beef, produce hogs and chickens and et cetera, but they can't get processing because it's controlled by JBS, which is a Brazilian conglomerate. That's the old John B. Swift company, now owned by Brazilians. It's controlled by Smithfield, which is a Chinese corporation, and is controlled by Tyson out of Arkansas. And these are the main monopolists that control it, that are creating this, and in fact, spreading the COVID through the workplace. And it's important what JD said about workers, consumers, farmers coming together. We're the ones that the food economy ought to be about. Earl, what else is it? Well, what it is Wall Street profits. And we've got to take it away from Wall Street and put it back in the hands of the people. And that's the importance of the campaigns that Scholten and Oliver are running here.
Well, and you know what, and I've said this about the healthcare industry as well, and Commissioner Hightower, you know, I got in this race because of healthcare, but when people want to say, well, let the free markets work, they can't. They can't in instances like this. They just can't, if it ever existed to begin with. But the reality is, when you have that sort of concentration of power, no individual farmer or family farm has the negotiating power. They're stuck in these incredibly oppressive contracts for years. And study after study is showing farmers actually are losing money every year. They're not making money, but big agri is big money. Yeah. And I always try to hammer home, like, so many of our issues could be solved if we actually really had campaign finance reform, and we forced big money out of the equation. We could actually do right by our communities. And you know, what we're seeing with the coronavirus and COVID-19 pandemic is the most vulnerable among us are the ones who get pushed to the front lines. And in our you know, meat packing industries across, I know we're having it here in Texas. I think Commissioner Hightower alluded that it's in Iowa as well. Those are typically immigrant populations, and I'm going to bring up something that's the Senate is trying to pass right now, and it's protections for these large businesses so that they can't be sued. They don't have to provide any protections for these workers, and they can contract coronavirus because they're placed shoulder to shoulder with their coworkers, and then the big agri is not, you can't sue them. That is what Mitch McConnell is trying to push through the Senate right now, and we should absolutely say no. I don't know how good it would be to tell Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, because they don't seem to listen to Texans, but we have to make sure that does not get through, and actually elect people who would never be okay with that. Sorry, I digress for a moment.
Well, but here's a huge part of that is that the legal standard is already reasonable care. So if they did everything that was just asked of them to do, they would be protected by law. Like if the CDC says, oh, you have to do this, if you provided masks, you're protected. So this is an extra layer upon that. Right. And I mean, to show how much power these monopolies have, President Trump has done one executive order during this pandemic about helping people, or so-called helping people. And it was to make sure that these meatpacking plants were open. I mean, think of how much power that there wasn't to make any company make masks for the common good or produce ventilators for the common good. It was to keep these open. So that's how much power they have. And to get back to one point, like we have a lot of hogs up here, and I like to tell hog farmers, how'd you do in 2017? And the majority of them at best probably broke about even, maybe make a couple bucks at best. But I tell them the CEO of China Pork, which owns Smithfield, made $291 million. That's more than Elon Musk. That's more than Tim Cook of Apple. That's nuts. And the money is not going back to the people who have dirt in their fingernails. And that's just wrong.
And JD, I sometimes like to break down those salaries because the numbers are so staggering. I like to break it down on what did they make every day? Well, that guy made $797,000 every day, 365 days out of the year.
Right.
Because sometimes the number just gets so big, it's just like, well, that doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
But a lot of people can understand $1 million. And when you're making $1 million a day, every day, but yeah, but it's not going down. There's no trickle down economics there.
Right.
Sorry, Commissioner.
Yeah. Well, you're the star, so you're the one I want to hear from. But I would just get back to your point, Julia, which is, Julie, that big money is controlling our politics. This isn't happening by accident. This is happening because these moneyed interests, these corporate giants, including foreign corporations, are able to buy their way into the political system and to control policies that affect their controlling our government, basically. And that is leading to a anti-democratic policy that's running roughshod over the American people. So it's that issue that I think both of you are focused on, and that we have to really drive home. And the powers that be in Washington, again, including to many of my Democratic friends, are saying, well, we got to be able to compete. We got to be able to take the big money, and we can take that big money. And of course, we're not going to use that money to do bad things, but in fact, they do. Mm-hmm. And so we're facing a situation in which the ordinary people are shut out. And that is why they will turn to a Donald Trump. That is why they will turn to anything that looks like maybe this could be different. So we've got to be different in the honest way that you two are, by going to people with real issues, with integrity, and standing with those folks against these moneyed interests. The powers that be seem to think that they can just run roughshod over the people, and they've been able to do that largely, incrementally over the years. But now the people are pushing back, and that's what's fueling your campaigns. And so I just urge you to embrace that as wholly as you possibly can, and carry it forward, because that's what people want to see. People who are just, not rich candidates, not politically connected candidates, but candidates who just want to step forward and say, we can do better than this. America is better than this.
Agreed. I think, and to your point, Commissioner Hightower, I think a lot of this gets down to and to yours, JD. I mean, what do people feel at the end of the day? What are they feeling? Are they feeling the economic success of those at the top? No. So when it comes to jobs, I mean, we in fact got a comment on Facebook. We need agriculture jobs. We need textile production. We need manufacturing here in the United States. So let's talk about jobs and by extension, what are the things that can stimulate economies in the rural parts of Texas and Iowa? And I've got some ideas. I know we definitely need to get broadband throughout, or high-speed internet throughout the United States, not just Texas. But that is I think could be a great equalizer. It's definitely not the only answer, but that's one of the things that we can do. I think we also, we don't talk enough about the fact that, some people do, I shouldn't say that, but the fact that when you have these big agribusinesses that have a certain business model, it's horrifically bad for our environment. And I think farmers actually know that. They know that. So what are some solutions to, economies in rural Texas and addressing climate? JD?
Yeah, I think, well, about the climate and everything, one thing that we are seeing are people need on-ramps. They need on-ramps on figuring out where to go, because right now, if they're not making a dime, we can't ask these folks to change their practices, especially when they're being handcuffed by these agriculture monopolies. I think when we talk about revitalizing rural America, you're exactly right. Technology has to be there. The other part, enforcing our antitrust laws, because you think about it, where there were 2 seed companies, there'd be 2 competitive regional managers. Now there's only 1. And we're seeing that in all these small towns. And then the third part of it is we need to create the infrastructure for more regional food hubs and things like that. And to me, that's pennies on the dollar. That's not going to be the big international trade that we're used to. But for me, we can still have that international trade, but for pennies on the dollar, we can do farm to community college, farm to nursing home, farm to school, farm to military. If we create that infrastructure, farmers are going to adapt to it. We create these regional food hubs. That's going to create these local creameries and local all sorts of types of food jobs. And that's rural economic development. And those are the jobs that are missing. If you want a $12 an hour job with no benefits, this district has thousands of them for you. And it's for companies that aren't from Iowa that come in, and we give these bigger companies, we give them a tax break, and they just take over. In my district, we have so many towns fighting for their local grocer when Dollar General's coming in, spending $8 to $9 an hour, giving their workers $8 to $9 an hour with minimal benefits. They tend to have their health insurance through the government because they don't make enough. And then the money we spend there goes out of state. And it makes no sense. And then when our farmers aren't able to make a dime at the same time, we got to scratch your head and wondering what's going on here when we can't feed ourselves. And so I feel that's the direction we need to go on.
People themselves, invest in your local communities.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about here. You can give subsidies to giants like Smithfield and Tyson and et cetera. You can give subsidies to General Foods and et cetera to come in and build a plant. But we don't need them to build the plants. If we create a financial system at a local level to fund local people to build their own processing facilities and their own value-added enterprises based on agriculture, then that money stays in the local community. And those enterprises care about pollution because they live there. So a Brazilian JBS executive doesn't give a damn about what water gets polluted in Iowa or in Texas. They don't live there and they don't care. So we need to invest in people who care. We need to invest in, as both of y'all are advocating, community. And the key word in community is unity. You and I coming together to make something happen that benefits the greater good. And that's the common good is what America is really all about. We talk a lot about the independent spirit, and that's very strong in America, and that's very important. But fundamentally, people in this country believe in the idea that we are all in this together, and the powers that be are trying to rend that and take it away from us.
Agreed. One of the things that I think we need to also kind of bring into the conversation is, we hear a lot about agriculture contributing to climate change because of the release of carbon from raising farm animals. But there's the potential to sequester carbon with regenerative agriculture. And to your point, JD, paying, and in fact, I was reading an article that in Montana, farmers are paid through these carbon tax credits. They're paid to start regenerative agriculture operations, and it's something that we have to do. You're right. If an executive is sitting in Brazil or sitting in China, they're not thinking about the consequences of what's happening in a community. But that community knows what happens when the soil is used up. You can't grow anything again. So opening it up to the floor for y'all to speak about the what people think about agriculture. They think it's like, oh, it's a climate problem, but it can also be part of the climate solution.
Well, here in Iowa, we had the Iowa caucus, which when all these presidential candidates, I think one of the biggest things that we saw a shift this year, I would say traditionally politicians on both sides come in here and only talk about ethanol, and that's about it. That's their attraction to farmers. But I think this year was a little bit different in that they came in here and they talked about paying farmers for their environmental services. And I think there's a lot of debate on what that looks like at this time. But I'm glad that started the discussion of what that should be, because I think that's exactly right. It's a good that's going to help all of us if we shift towards that way, because I mean, ever since Earl Butz made us go fence post to fence post in the 1970s, it's really our soil health has really just gone down, and so that's one thing that we're seeing, especially as the climate changes and we have heavier rains. What we need is for our soil to absorb those rains, and the way that you do that is with the cover crops, with the buffer strips, all those things that, I mean, folks know this, and this is even the Farm Bureau even talks about this at this point. And so that's so that it's common sense when it's that far. So it's just one of those things where the answers are right in front of us. We just got to make sure that we have politicians able to go into DC and push for these policies.
Right.
And that's what's missing is that political presence that even has an acquaintance with farming, an acquaintance with rural America. We've allowed corporate lobbyists. We've allowed economists who are hired by corporate interests. We've allowed special interests to basically make agricultural policy in America for the last 40, 50 years. I mean, these are people who could not run a watermelon stand if we gave them the melons and had the highway patrol flag down the customers for them. But they are in charge of food policy. And so we've got to take food policy back. And you don't do that by saying there's something out there called food policy. We'll go grab it. You do that by electing people like Scholten and Julie Oliver to the Congress. Y'all can make such change just by your knowledge and by your commitment to local economies and local people. You will educate even the Democratic caucus to maybe understand, wait a minute, farmers, as Julie just indicated, are not the problem, they're the solution. The regenerative agriculture that she mentioned, that's a phrase these days, but what it really means is take care of the soil. If you take care of the soil will take care of the plants, and the plants will take care of you. That's it. That's pretty common sense. Agriculture really comes down to the art and science of cooperating with nature rather than constantly trying to overwhelm nature, which is what our policy have been for 50 years now. I'll tell you just one quick story. With Susan DeMarco, I wrote a book in the 1970s, early 70s, called Hard Tomatoes, Hard Times. And it was a story about how the corporate agriculture was overwhelming, not just farmers and farm workers, but food itself. And that's where we got the hard tomato, the little hard nugget tomato, made to be shipped across the country and around the world rather than to have flavor and to have nutrition and et cetera. And DeMarco, she was doing the research on it, and she went to see the chief economist for the Department of Agriculture. And he was very proud of these hard tomatoes. And he said, look at these things, man, they'll stay on the shelf for 3 months and they won't rot. This is just wonderful. And DeMarco said to him, well, but they don't seem to taste quite, she was from New Jersey, the home of some of the great tomatoes, really. And she said, but they don't seem to taste quite as well. And he leaned over to her and he said, your children will never know the difference. And that's their attitude. And that's what we've got to defeat, is this attitude that agriculture is just a widget. It is, in fact, our culture.
Yeah, it is, and it touches everything. Go ahead, JD.
I was just one of a couple things on that, but this is exactly right. This is why your race and my race are so important, because I mean, you look at the Democratic Party, and we are becoming more urban and to be honest, more coastal. And my two political heroes here that the commissioner knows very well, Berkeley Bedell and Tom Harkin, they used to represent this area. Now the National Party couldn't pick this out on a map. We quit. If we're ever going to win back the Senate on a consistent basis or be competitive, we got to do better in rural America. And we don't do better unless we get people like you and I elected. People who understand rural America and know the connection and the importance of it. And that's a huge part of why I'm running. But then after last cycle, I was one of the few people who were really pushing to enforce our antitrust laws. And then with the caucus coming here, I worked on about 6 of the presidential campaigns, their rural policies, and I made sure I forced it on all of them. And I think all 20 or how many people ran all had enforcing our antitrust laws in their rural policy, because that's what it takes is folks like us standing up and saying, you know what, this is what's not only the right policy, but it's a winnable policy in these areas. And so I think your race and my race are so important, just so we can start paving the pathway for Democrats to say, this is how you win in rural America.
Right. Agree. We're the party of the New Deal. I mean, we're dreaming big and fighting for workers.
Yeah.
And on that note, we know that a lot of workers in big agriculture are not treated fairly. And many of them come from immigrant communities. And they are worth fighting for, just like the farmers are worth fighting for, because if you have healthy workers, you can have a healthy economy. And I think that's something that this current administration doesn't understand. If you have a healthy population, you can have a healthy economy. You can't have a healthy economy without healthy people. But JD, and we do have a couple of questions. Somebody keeps putting questions in front of my face. But I do want you to talk about workers' rights when it comes to big agriculture and farming.
So we moved here to Sioux City in 1984. And our first Christmas, I was 4 years old, and our first Christmas photo was in front of the stockyards. That's how important the Sioux City stockyards was and still is. We've been an immigrant meatpacking town since the 1880s. And we were a hotbed for COVID for about 2 weeks, the #1 place for the New York Times for about 2 weeks when this pandemic started to flame up here. And so what we have seen, and this is throughout the whole district, we have meatpacking plants all throughout the district. There was a story right before I launched in 2017 that talked about this gentleman who started to work in the meatpacking plants in the late 70s, early 80s, and he got paid $16 an hour. The corporation came in, a new corporation came in, de-unionized, it all broke up the unions, and they started paying at $5-6 overnight, and almost tanked a whole city. And they had to, the city actually had to go to the new company and said, you can't do this to us. And so if you drive right now in Sioux City, you will hear some of the different meatpacking plants say, hey, we're hiring $16 an hour 4 decades later. That's the reality. And that it's consistent. And so, I mean, you talk about even systemic racism and the talk about Black Lives Matter at this point. I mean, to use people of color and they're the majority of the ones who are working in these slaughter homes right now. And it's these monopolies that are suppressing these people. They, at the beginning of this, they were asking the workers to bring their own masks. And it's just, you know, it's this power. And it again, it goes back to it's consumers, it's workers, and it's farmers all coming together to take on this power to benefit us all in the long run.
Agreed.
What it is too, it's immoral.
Mm-hmm.
This is an immoral economy. They deliberately are killing people.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is for the people, the consumers, particularly because they have more power, the farmers, the farm workers, the meat packing workers, the processing workers, the retail workers, all of us, we are the vast majority of America. And we've got to come together behind candidates like Julie Oliver and JD and stand up to this immoral corporate system that is destroying the ideals of America. I mean, we're a nation based on, again, the notion of economic fairness, social justice, equal opportunity for all people. What's wrong with that? That's what we're for. Let's push it.
I love that. Okay, so to address some of the questions, one of them, we got a question about groundwater from how do we hold polluters accountable when it comes? There's obviously a pipeline coming through Texas. That's different. That's oil and gas, but big farming can also be big polluters of water systems. Well, they can be. They are big polluters. What are some solutions there?
I mean, well, in Iowa, we have a problem with runoff, and that goes with climate change. That comes with our farm practices. And what we're realizing is, again, the buffer strips, the soil health. If we have the cover crops and no-till farming, those types of things, the things that we all know that work. We need to incentivize farmers for doing that. And I mean, I understand where if farmers lose nitrate on their land, that's money lost on them too. And so if we give them that on-ramp to get on board with creating those buffer strips and helping them out and paying them for their environmental services, I feel that will go a long ways with getting us in the right direction. But here in the state of Iowa, all of that is voluntarily held. And so, and what we're seeing is it's not really helping any of us. And then a lot of it also comes from hog farming. And what we're seeing in that, I mean, it's these agriculture monopolies that are handcuffing our farmers, and they're handcuffing on the money side. They're handcuffing them on how they farm. They're dictating the prices. They're dictating how they farm. And again, they don't live here. They're living in JBS and in Smithfield and China and in Brazil. If we enforce our antitrust laws and get a community involved in our decision making, that's how we get to what we want.
Great.
But one other aspect that you know, Julia, very well is is the allowing corporations to use the power of eminent domain.
Mm-hmm.
Power of eminent domain to run roughshod over anybody who is any property owner who is in their way, and that has allowed these pipelines to develop. And so we've got public officials in our state, Republican overwhelmingly, but Democrats too have done it over the years to allow them to exert the public power to take property for their private gain, and just to run these pipelines through us, and other, not just pipelines, but other activities like that.
Well, it used to be that property rights were some of the most closely and cherished rights in some people's history in America. And at least when I was in law school, JD, maybe they taught you something similar, like you only eminent domain if it was an absolute necessity for the good of the community, right? We're not seeing that anymore. And again, we're seeing, honestly, because there is no bargaining power with workers anymore. They've lost that because we've diluted the power of unions. Farmers are no longer, and landowners are no longer, can no longer be competitive. They just do not have the negotiating power. They certainly don't even have the legal power to draft competitive contracts that you would need, that these other corporations have. So I think one of the biggest things that we've seen in over the last 3 years is the failing of our EPA. And I get that that's an administrative function, but we need a functioning EPA. The guy I'm running against actually drafted one of the shortest pieces of legislation, and it is abolish the EPA or repeal the EPA. I can't remember. We need a functioning EPA because we know corporations aren't going to do good by the communities in which they kind of coexist. And, we wouldn't have child labor laws if corporations made the right decisions, 100 years ago. We wouldn't have a Clean Air and Clean Water Act if corporations made right choices and were responsible. We wouldn't have a 40-hour work week or minimum wage laws if corporations were, these benefactors of good. But the reality is they're not, and we need these things to rein them in and harness the power that they have. And the EPA is something that could be effectively utilized in this area because big agri is a huge polluter and it affects everybody around them. So hang on, I think there's another question. Somebody's asking about, I'm trying to read my husband's handwriting, killing corn subsidies. I can't read it. He said, ignore that one. Sorry, I didn't read that part. All right. So no, we did have one I know from Kim, who is a regenerative rancher, or she does the whole thing, regenerative agriculture. But she said we need mobile processing for healthier meat. I guess she's talking about meat processing. And I'll have to ask her about that. I know Kim, and she's a wealth of it. But do y'all know anything about mobile meat processing? I don't.
I presume it means moving from town to town. That is that everybody's got to come to, but it goes out and does processing, even on farms and ranches. And I know a bison rancher here in Texas that is a terrific example of that. He brings the process right to one. It's more humane for the animals themselves, and it's also a community benefit.
Yeah, we don't have anything like that in Iowa. We used to have a lot of local lockers, and now that's really gone by the wayside, unfortunately. And I think one of our answers to the local grocers that are being undercut by certain entities like Dollar General, I feel is going back to that kind of local locker mindset. In that, I think this is a perfect opportunity for rural America to use technology where you can order your food and then they deliver it. And a lot of the companies talk about that last mile being the most expensive. And so maybe they don't bring it to your house, but maybe they bring it to what the equivalent of a modern locker. And then you go and you like put your code in and unlock stuff there. I feel like there's so much technology that can be used to help solve some of these solutions. But again, if we don't have that broadband or technology access, and that's really a thing right now in this pandemic, the haves and the have-nots when it comes to just internet access. I mean, the school kids here, we had a huge issue here in Sioux City that all the parking lots, you can park there and get free Wi-Fi because a lot of the school kids didn't have access to the internet they needed.
Right. Again, a great equalizer. So many kids are going to be disadvantaged from this pandemic because they were not able to access education and learn online learning when their schools were shut down. I know we're coming up on an hour, and I'm just like, I'm looking at all my notes of the things that we didn't talk about. Like we could have probably easily made this a 2-hour, 3-hour long discussion. We didn't talk about country of origin labeling. We didn't really talk about trade deals and how this administration has harmed, done such economic damage to farmers across America and ranchers with the disastrous trade deals that he's behind. Oh my gosh. We didn't talk about that much about immigrant workers, but how they are truly, they're a lifeblood for our agricultural community. And again, what this administration has done to vilify immigrants when they are the heart of our food source. We didn't get a chance to talk about that. We didn't talk about, well, I'll skip that one because that one's too sad. We didn't talk about having a moratorium on, large factory farms, which is hopefully the future. But I want to give y'all a couple of minutes of, those are the things that I was like, we didn't even get to talk about this. There's so much. And so it's like, there's so much, and it filters into every area of our lives, more than we know. But I want to give y'all some time to closing thoughts and comments. And JD, we'll start with you. We'll let Commissioner write us out for the evening.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Julie, so much for organizing this and for the commissioner to be on. It's truly an honor. And I think we realize that, there are clear pathways of where we need to go as rural communities, as both Iowa and Texas, and as a nation. And I'm really glad you were able to do this event, because this is so meaningful to not only me, but this community and the communities around here. I think it ends up going back to what the commissioner said his daddy said, is we all do better when we all do better. I mean, that's it. I mean, when we, the other part of this too, I think that we should be talking about is what you mentioned, how you got involved in the first place, healthcare. You look how Canada got their universal healthcare. There's a bunch of Saskatchewan farmers in the 50s that they don't have employer insurance. And so that's a huge part of all this as well. And in this community, in my community, in this district, when I go to town and stop at a gas station, almost every gas station has a donation box for someone who just got in a hospital or to help pay for their medical costs. And it's insane. And so where we're going as a nation, I think coming out of this pandemic is such a pivotal moment of where we're going to be. Are we going to be more concentrated, where it is going to be more and more of the haves and the have-nots, or are we going to go to a place where we all do better when we all do better? And I think that is how you can just sum it all up in a nutshell. And so with that, I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Hightower.
Well, no, it's such a joy to be with both of you and to see the connection, and for our viewers to understand the connection all the way from Texas to Iowa and elsewhere, because we are connected in this fight for little d democratic values. So I'm greatly encouraged. And have enjoyed the conversation, but greatly encouraged by your candidacies. So this is, you can't just say, well, I wish government would be better. You got to make it better. And we've got a slogan down here in the Our Revolution movement that we're not here to protest the government, we're here to become the government. And that's what we have to do. And you two are leaders in that, true grassroots leaders. I think of a slogan that a moving company had when I first moved from North Texas down here to Austin, where I now am. And this moving company, it was just a small, it wasn't one of these big chain things, just a small outfit, two big guys with a truck. And I think their names are Skeeter and Booger or something like that. But they had an attitude, and they said, if we can get it loose, we can move it. That's what we're talking about, is getting this economy, this democracy loose, so the people will move it from themselves. So thank you very much, both of you, for what you're doing. Very encouraging.
Well, thank you. I couldn't have said it better than you, and I won't even try. What I will do is leave everybody with JD's website, Scholten Fork, Iowa, and that's Scholten, the number 4, Iowa. I think we put it in the comments section on the Facebook feed. And I'm not gonna lie, it's, you know, running even a campaign is like running a small business. So JD and I need contributions and volunteer time. So, and you can volunteer for JD, you can make phone calls from Texas. You could be in Lampasas, Texas, on your ranch making phone calls for JD in Iowa. So I'm gonna encourage everybody to, it's all hands on deck. This is nobody sitting on the edges. You don't get to stay at home this election. You have to be involved, because the soul of our country is at stake and democracy is at stake. And I know that sounds dramatic, but we know what we're living with right now. We are, most of us, sheltering in place. I mean, the reason you see 3 bookshelves behind 3 people on your screen is because this administration knew a pandemic was coming and didn't just threw their hands up in the air and said, oh, well. So we have an opportunity to change things in November. And for the folks in Texas that are watching this, please, please, please help JD. I'd like your help as well, but you can be anywhere and volunteer for anyone, especially during the pandemic. You can literally be anywhere and help out. So thank you both. This, I mean, again, an incredible honor for me to be able to share this Brady Bunch screen with y'all. And, you know, how many times are we going to get to say that, you know? Hopefully never again in our lifetime. I am grateful for your advocacy, for your willingness to share your time, and for your commitment to making America truly a better place. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.